Um, for those of you here, my name is Jeffrey Lewis. I'm part of the Object Relations Institute. I am in private practice for many, many years. I've been treating patients for 41 years, 13 of which was in psychiatric hospital setting at the beginning of my career. I taught at St. John's University for 26 years, but most of my work has been private practice, and my emphasis and what I've mostly written about or lectured about has always been either Shanda Ferenczi, dreams and dream science and dream interpretation, evolutionary psychology. Those are my areas of interest and expertise. And so this presentation today, I wanted to go beyond what I know. And so I'm gonna start my presentation that I've grown so accustomed to lecturing on Shanda Ferenczi and Michael Balint that I needed to get out of my safe zone. That is the work on therapeutic regression as devised in the 1920s and 30s, and then up until the 1960s. What else has happened since this innovation of theory and practice? It wasn't a fad, a trend, or a phase. I taught at the Utvash-Lorand University in the Pest portion of Budapest on and off between 1995 and 1998. And I resided in the hills of Buda, within a brief walk from Ferenczi's home and office. And I learned a great deal from Ferenczi scholars during that time. But recently I've felt the need to bring this still relevant and important pioneering work up to date and into the 21st century. My window and entree was opened by having recently written a book review on Lorraine Price's 2016, so we're like right up to now, her 2016 wonderful tome entitled Better Late Than Never, the Reparative Therapeutic Relationship in Regression to Dependence. And I wrote the book review, and she opened my eyes and it made me want to go further and really, really take a look at what's been happening. You know, what's been happening since the 60s and up until the present regarding like regression therapy. As far back as 1923, Ferenczi challenged the usual methods of psychoanalysis, asserting that the treatment needed to be more than intellectual reconstruction or insight via interpretation, but more so an emotional reliving, a corrective emotional experience, whereas part of the personality is allowed to regress to the pre-traumatic state, thereby permitting analysis to penetrate to the level of trauma. Balint, Ferenczi's analysand, and protege likewise advanced the idea that treatment must proceed at the level of relationship existing prior to the basic fault, at the level of primary anxiety. Balint's basic fault, found in the most disturbed patients, developed when the facilitating environment, and I have to be clear about what this means, because a lot of times, you know, it's sort of interchangeable. Facilitating environment and mother are interchangeable, and that's not what's meant, because this then always is putting the blame on the mother. We're talking about the facilitating environment, whomever that may be, the mothering figure. So if I say mother, I don't mean mother, okay? And that his basic fault was found in the most disturbed patients, and it developed when the facilitating environment of early infancy did not match the infant's needs, and unlike dual instinct theory, was not something dammed up for which a better outlet must be found, but something missing. Hence, regression is not back to something that was once there and got repressed or lost, but rather to a developmental epoch where something was needed but never existed. Freud considered these most disturbed patients symptoms, but resolved nothing. Donald Winnicott, perhaps, possessed a special grasp of the whirling, inchoate world of infancy, since as both a pediatrician and a psychoanalyst, he witnessed in vivo the sameness between the way of being of his infant patients, but also his adult patients, who had survived early emotional failure and remained frozen at the failure sites, usually failure to have absolute dependency adequately parented. I love this quote of his. He referred to the proper place to study schizophrenia, manic depression, and melancholia as being the nursery, and illuminated the similar processes occurring between mother-infant and between him and his patients. He brilliantly showed that at the most early stages of development, disturbing happenings, which he named impingements due to immature ego ability, are not able to be integrated by the months-old infant because, quotes, they have not reached a stage where there's a place to see from. If there's no seer, how can something be seen? So, left with a, quote, non-experience, which cannot be forgotten or repressed because it has already fallen outside of memory, all of this insight into the world of infancy then led to the advocacy of regression as a means. The breakdown, which already had happened during infancy, had never really been experienced, since it was not safe to do so. But within therapy, with safety provided, it's experienceable, and the emerging traumata results literally present, but this time with a new significant other who is dependable, soothing, and able to regulate emotional overload. It is from this that the concept of good enough mother earns credibility. It quotes mother who in the early environment recognizes, or nearly so, the infant's needs and developmental limits through her attunement, which otherwise you could call it synchrony, you could call it symbiotic empathy, and only allows such stimulation as is tolerable to the infant. And by the way, the word infant is derived from the French enfant, meaning not talking. The state of being of infancy is pushed further by an analyst, M. Little, who was an Margaret. I didn't know her first name, and she's new to me. Because I told you this was a discovery for me.
Oh, how wonderful!
And she was an analysand of Winnicott. She describes infancy as a state of being or experiencing with no sense of there being a person or self. There's only anger, fear, love, but no person feeling such. Only a bundle of sensory receptors, for example, sound, touch, the visual, hallucinatory, taste, smell, with no means or organizing the overwhelming, undifferentiated chaos without an auxiliary ego to organize and contain this scream of the wholly dependent infant. It is this which emerges in regressive treatment. Further elaborations are offered by Erskine, and this is 2007, who describes the infant in a position of psychotic anxiety, with feelings of going to pieces, falling forever, with no relationship to its body, no orientation, no means of communicating, thus completely isolated. All of which, within the absence of an environmental containment, likely surface later in life as psychotic or borderline states. Other theorists, such as Bion, have likewise attempted to describe these fragile early months, asserting that where the mother is an inadequate repository for indigestible feelings, which ought to be made digestible and returned to the infant in palatable form, the child remains in a state of nameless dread. Now, I don't think it takes a genius to realize that I'm pretty sure that Bion's metaphor is derived from the feeding behavior of birds, wherein the mother eats the food brought back to her hatchlings and then regurgitates it into their mouths in a digestible form. Another more contemporary theoretical analyst, Van Sweden, who I was not familiar with. I cited works beginning in 1995. So again, trying to push this into, more into the present. Van Sweden spells out several guidelines when working with patients suffering from pre-edible disorders of maternal deprivation. Firstly, must change from analytic abstinence and reliance upon interpretation. Secondly, it's the early months of life which are replicated in the transference and must be worked through. And thirdly, that the analyst's response, survival through, and containment of the return of primitive experiences in therapy can result in progression, thus enabling a second chance at ego integration. So like the more contemporary people, taking Ferenczi's ideas, Balint's ideas. I mean, this is still something that's happening. It's just that, like in my courses and everything, I just wasn't caught up. I didn't have time, to sort of contemporize this. All of these clinicians hold in common the concept of very early trauma, be it easily identifiable events, such as abuse or physical neglect, or be it less discrete but pervasive accumulation of misattunements. And this is where Masood Khan's idea of cumulative trauma comes into the picture, which overwhelm the infant, lacking the psychological resources to manage the onrush of pain and terror, which later manifest in regressive psychotherapy. But we must be clear about therapeutic regression. It can only be reparative when the infantile experience is almost relived. If it's relived in the original way, using the same primitive defenses and resultant trauma, it amounts only to a re-traumatization. This must not have the same ending, but be similar enough to trigger the emotional processes belonging to the event. Hence, the regression to utter dependency relies upon the development of a relationship with enough similarity to the early infantile relationship to facilitate regression, yet which has such critical, significant differences such that it is safe, accepting, understanding, and non-judgmental. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of using regression in therapy is the adaptation of boundaries. A keystone within the profession defining accepted ways of behaving. Things such as timing, payment, the use of touch, the length of sessions, are aspects of the difference between boundary crossing and boundary violation, where the latter is a departure from accepted practice, placing the patient at risk if it's boundary violation. All analysts, if granted anonymity, confess about deviating from orthodoxy, but they do so with the feel of approbation, litigation, castigation. So you have to catch them, like quietly in a corner somewhere. Then they'll talk about it. Speaking of boundary expansion, every single participant in Price's study and every colleague I've ever spoken with has retooled the, quotes, rules when necessary. The only exception being students in PhD externships. They stick to the rules because they don't dare do otherwise. As Mozart's comic opera Cose fan tutte puts it bluntly, they all do it. Amongst the boundary expansions appropriate in regressive therapy, for example, contact outside of the designated therapy sessions and parameters, use of actual transitional objects, and physical touch. It is touch which generates the most askance views and raised eyebrows. The justification is that some physical contact is necessary to remain grounded at the time of the patient's re-experiencing memories of infantile trauma. Infant research has undeniably confirmed the necessary place of tactile involvement in healthy development. And all you have to do is remember back to your Psych 101 course and René Spitz and his studies in 1957, and that's where it all began. And the significance of his studies. But you have to go back to your first year in college as a psych student.
Marasmus is what he was studying. Yeah, horrible.
And like at these orphanages, where, the orphanages were squeaky clean. The kids were taken perfect care of. They ate, they ate perfectly. The food was fantastic, but there wasn't enough staff to touch them. And if they weren't touched, they died. Naturally, symbolic touch, that is the holding environment, is necessary for every patient. But for patients in regression to absolute dependency, actual touch, for example, holding a hand, a hug, the scent of the analyst, it proves the analyst's existence. And though this is a slippery slope, it cannot be summarily dismissed with regressed patients, at least patients regressed to the level that I'm talking about. The same applies for the use of transitional objects, like a teddy bear or a blankie. It's not going to suffice to just give your patient, here's my phone number, or here's my business card. Those are transitional objects. But for most patients, that might work. Having your analyst's card in your wallet,
sense of security,
that might do it,
yeah.
But not with the patients I'm talking about. They need something much more concrete, some of them.
And they have the pillows on the couch.
And you're right. You're absolutely right. And even, Lorraine Price, she talks about like with, some of the people in her study talk about giving, these patients, like maybe a piece of clothing, like a scarf or a shirt or something that is truly, a personal item. It has the analyst's scent on it and the essence of the analyst. This is a very dangerous method, but it's right. And like to represent soothing, which was absent. Now, knowing that there was very, all of us presenting had very little time. So I sort of like cut it there, sort of arbitrarily. I just figured by now I'd probably run out of time. And so I could go on. And in the how much time do I have?
2 minutes.
I got 2 minutes?
2 minutes, and then we should have a discussion.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay. Okay, because I have something, I'd like to answer questions or have discussion, but I brought in an example, from a patient that I'm treating who is such a patient, like where I made a mistake. Uh-oh. I made a mistake, but the mistake was catastrophic. And you would think, and I try to make the point that you cannot minimize these mistakes. Like I'm prepared to tell you, like I'm not going to go through a whole case description and everything. I'll just give you a little vignette and what happened 3 weeks ago and the role of making mistakes and also the role of shame in the lives of these patients. But how about any remarks and questions? It could be a comment.
Well,
Doesn't have
one
to-
comment is that it's very refreshing what you're saying, because I have a patient of mine who is borderline or whatever, however you want to diagnose, and issues of separation and my disappearing on Friday, like today was a crazy day, I wanted to see her, whatever. I had to make time because otherwise, or if my car is not in the parking lot, I call her because otherwise, it's not her, but it's also me that, we start the session in the wrong foot. So what I did...
But you're really talking about what she's writing about. And she's saying like all these others, and the participants in her study, and it was a fairly large study, and it went over a period of 7 years.
Yeah, but
So-
also with
I
this
don't have a
patient,
phone like that.
with this patient also what I did is
Yes.
once I was going away on vacation and separations are a disaster, I gave her, she took a pillow of my office that she loves and she always holds.
Yes.
So I said, take it with you. So I said, I feel less guilty leaving her, it's like, it goes both ways, the
Okay,
transference,
but
I
you
got
know,
the
like that,
transference.
I appreciate your, your honesty and all that, but like, that's what's called for. That's what this patient needed.
Yeah.
She didn't need your business card.
That's another story.
Please. I'm sorry.
And then she-
Yeah, about Margaret Little. She was diagnosed as psychotic,
Mhm.
and she became an analyst. One of the things that she said was transformative for her, one of the most valuable things that happened to her working with Winnicott. She was lying on the couch, it was analysis she lay on the couch. It's not always that way anymore, but it was analysis she lay on the couch. And he reached out, because she asked him to. I forget if he touched her knee or held her hand, but he maintained that. He made the contact, and he maintained it.
Yes.
And it worked. And I missed the beginning. I don't know if you quoted at all Joyce McDougall, Theaters of the Body. In Theaters of the Body, she speculates, she doesn't speculate, she postulates, that in that state that you defined as pre-verbal, pre-memory, when there's trauma, there can't be repression because there's no awareness to repress.
Right.
But
There's
what she
nothing to
said
forget.
is the body remembers.
Yes.
And therefore you have sometimes very complex somatic problems.
And I completely agree.
I thought you
Because
were,
I completely agree. I I gave a lecture maybe here or elsewhere somewhere where I said, this pinky has been with me since the day I was born.
Yes.
In one form or another.
It's always been there. It's gone through everything I've gone through. It remembers things that I don't remember.
Beautiful.
I had a friend who was raised by a mother and a grandmother. And the mother was eventually diagnosed as a catatonic schizophrenic. And her grandmother was a typical sort of Eastern European, but Bushko was a nanny and sort of had one kid on the hip and stirred the pot on the stove. And one of the things that she talked about to me was her earliest memories of being held by these two women, and how when we were intimate, it would bring back, depending on how I was behaving, one or the other of those two mothers. Now, I was not particularly psychologically sophisticated in those days, and certainly not in that way. And it was a little unnerving to be compared. But over the years, as I got to know her better, and as I got to deeper into my own work psychologically and deeper into the field in general, I came to understand how crucial those two early mothering experiences were. And her psychotic mother got to the point where she would open up windows and throw her and her brother out onto the backyard because she was convinced that the house was full of gas.
Right.
But the basic thing was that the psychotic mother was the one who was holding her in this rigid, formulaic, baby book fashion, whereas her grandmother had this very spontaneous, tactile, and nurturing sort of quality. And the two stuck with her, and they're both pre-verbal. They must have gone back to the very earliest, because I think her mother's first hospitalization was when she was 1.5 years old. So this is all pre-verbal. The question then becomes, and her big challenge was finding a therapist who could handle exactly the material that you and this book, and it was very difficult because
I'll tell you,
it was very difficult
this
to find
example,
anybody.
and like, you know, he's not the only one I'm treating or have treated over the last 41 years. I mean, I think when I had the 13 years of hospital experience, I felt like I'll take anybody into my practice. I mean, I think I've seen it all, or have seen, you know, like about as bad as it gets. You know, I was director of psychology at South Beach Psychiatric Center.
But let me ask you something.
Yeah, but
the other problem was, this was during the 60s when we first
I
met
just
her.
want to have like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I did 5 minutes.
We're almost out of time.
Well, if we started on
For us to get to.
I am the next
Oh,
presenter.
We have a total of 5 minutes to the session, so did you want to present? You had
Yeah,
something you
I
wanted to
had
present?
something, I really want you to.
So why don't, okay, so this whole thing comes to an end at 3 o'clock, so you could take your, wait a minute, what
No,
time is it?
there's a built-in
3:05.
Well, we're supposed to end
We-
at 3:55, but we got to start in 5 minutes.
Right, I'm giving you the extra 5 minutes, which
Okay.
means that it ends at 3, at 3.
I don't wanna hold
It ends
it.
at 3
Yeah.
o'clock, and yours
So
starts
you
at
give me
3:05.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize because I really would have liked to
Yeah,
have heard
Okay,
it.
Yes,
and,
so do you want to read, yeah, did you have
let me
something?
just say, like, I mean, this patient, and this just happened 3 weeks ago. I've been treating this guy for 20 years, and I'm used to like really, really severe regressions to infancy, you know, which doesn't happen as much anymore. And he's a gifted musician, but he's on sight disability, and he doesn't get that many opportunities to play, although he did play Madison Square Garden with Pete Seeger at one point. But, you know, he is on psych disability. So the only times he gets to play is like, he's got like one upcoming event, which is this Sunday. It's a small thing, but you know, but he takes it seriously. He's got like a playlist of 30 songs, and you know, and he's going to really, you know, knock them out. And you know, and every once in a while he gets to jam with some other musicians. So in the session that I'm talking about, you know, he had come in very upset and distraught because a grade school chum of his had, quotes, upstaged his upcoming gig this Sunday by holding a barbecue weekend the weekend before. So he's thinking, okay, well, his grade school friends are going to go to the barbecue, they're not going to come to his gig. And he took it personally. So in the midst of this, he had been actively recruiting another guitarist for his jam sessions and was supposed to play with him on the coming weekend. But he said in treatment, I'm going to cancel because I'm not in the mood. And I felt like
We canceled the gig altogether.
cancel the audition
Okay,
and
audition.
playing with this new guy,
Oh,
all right? And I thought that his wounded ego at his chum's barbecue betrayal and his very low mood might be intruding upon his substantial virtuosity and denying him a too rare chance to get out of his apartment, meet a fellow musician, and have an afternoon of just having some fun, you know, two guitarists. So here's my mistake. I reminded him that he and I and all creative people, that we create regardless of being in the mood or not. And that waiting for the right mood state or for inspiration, that no writer, painter, musician would ever create anything. Because I thought like he was just so distraught, you know, about the barbecue thing, that he was saying, I'm not in the mood to go audition this new guitarist. He became teary, and he told me he was angry and upset with me for insinuating that he was not a serious musician. And what he meant, but it didn't have a chance to come out, was that he sensed that the potential recruited guitarist was not talented enough or committed enough. So he was, quotes, not in the mood to travel to Brooklyn just to waste his time. This is a misattunement. I didn't get him. I thought I got him, and I thought that I was giving him some encouragement that, like, you gotta create, like, whether you feel like it or not. I missed the boat. I totally missed the boat, and he totally broke down. And I just wanted to say that, like, it's very frequent in the presentation of regression to dependency in therapy that shame develops. And, you know, it has like, in the earliest stages of infant development, when the infant does not see its own acceptability in its mother's eyes, but sees instead disapproval, disgust, disdain, shame as an identity forms. Not just an instance of shame, but shame as part of the identity. And so that, you know, in the early environment, significant others show what is acceptable, explicit or implicit. It can be part of normal socialization, or it can be toxic, constricting self-development and leaving the infant in a negative reaction to themselves. Shame as identity equals belief that one's very being is flawed, that one is defective as a human being. This is how he interpreted my suggestion to him.
I think you're being too hard on yourself. You could not possibly have seen that.
I
You
couldn't
could
have,
not possibly have seen that in a million years.
but Robinson, how does any again, I don't want to say mother, I want to say mother, but I don't want to say mother. I'm using mother just as a general. How does any mother know what their 3-month-old needs?
Yeah, but he's not 3 months.
Yes, he is.
No.
Yes, he is.
No, he isn't.
Is.
He is not.
And so
You
the
tap
mother,
into a part of him that is, but
Right.
he is not.
the mother,
He's
I'm
mother,
sorry,
autonomous
I'm getting
adult.
water from my
He's
presentation.
an autonomous adult
okay,
who's in your office for therapy.
okay.
And he ought to be able to distinguish between a temporary regression to 3 months.
He's better able now than he was
I
when
wonder
he
if I
started.
could, I wonder if I could get a question in.
Oh, sure.
And we could just roll this for another 5 minutes, because even though we're not ready to start yet. So, you were kind of contrasting this regression to dependency therapy with cognitive, well, you used the term cognitive interpretation, I guess, or I'm not sure exactly what the term was that you used. But,
Interventions.
okay, yeah, but I'm wondering where or how you see the role of dream work in this, and in particular, it seemed to me that dreams provide a possible window or doorway into this pre-verbal stuff, and that, you know, and an access to some very affectively highly charged stuff.
Yes.
And that when the interpretation of dreams is done right, it's not a purely cognitive thing, but it's sort of helping there's a healing process that occurs in terms of enabling the patient to connect the dots or to sort of connect parts of themselves that are very primitive and split off into the self. And I'm wondering if you see that as kind of an adjunct to this kind of...
Absolutely. I mean, I make extensive use of dreams
Right.
with whatever, I mean, like whomever I'm treating, because I find it to be something that I've always been given some sort of ability to do,
Right.
since I've done a lot of it, but I'm also interested in it. But of course, I would use this, you know, I would use this, you know, for a patient like this.
Right.
And, you know, like, I think like this whole idea of making mistake, and I think Robinson, I mean, he had to leave, but I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong. You know, he's saying, he's an adult, he should have known. I mean, when an
These
adult
people don't know.
when an adult regresses to that state of dependency and is overwhelmed with all this privilege, they don't know.
Well, I think the point might be that I think you're right in the sense that to see in retrospect that it was a mistake. But I think there's also such a thing as having the idealized analyst that we, you know, in other words, to realize that you're never going to achieve the ideal of the perfect analyst.
This is what I was
Right.
like going to say, like
Right.
about. I mean, I don't have a chance because you're next.
And
Up.
she's up in a
And
couple
you're up
minutes.
here.
In 2 minutes, right?
Then I don't want to take your space. All right.
Okay.
And
You have 2 more minutes, literally 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
so, like I was going to say, like during regression to the point of dependency, the nature of the transference can lose its as-if quality, because the patient perceives the therapist in an authentic way, where he or she really is the parent in that experience. This aspect of profound regression is psychotic. The as-if quality of transference is lost. When working with the regressed ego, the therapist's misattunements can cause deep shame, that's what he was experiencing, especially when the transference has devolved into a psychotic state, and should never be minimized or made light of. With every treatment, these mistakes, misunderstandings, misattunements can be used to deepen the relationship if seized as a reparative opportunity. The analyst needs not become the mother to the dependent infant state patient, but only to accept the developmental needs and offer an appropriate response. the occasional and unintentional failures in therapeutic empathy. How could it be otherwise? Since the actual mother can only guess at the needs of their months-old nonverbal baby. If handled right, it may actually help the patient to recognize the guaranteed failures in the relational realm and advance in the direction of resilience. When the analyst fails the patient, the regression may seem minor, yet to the patient it may be experienced as a hurtful impingement which may engender pain and rage.
Thank you. Someday we'll talk about this patient that I was mentioning to
okay.
you because I made a lot of mistakes and she's still with me despite the cushion and whatever else was going on.
But I liked the example that you gave because it shows that you're sort of in the same arena as me.
It sounds like Robinson heard what you said is that you're somehow beating yourself, and
I know.
I didn't hear it that way, but
I'm
I think you might have heard it that
I'm
way.
not beyond beating myself.
No, but I mean, I think that self-criticism is a good thing if it's
But
not.
patients like this have produced or induced this countertransference that is so intense that sometimes it's very difficult for us
Yes.
to deal with it. And so we
Yes.
have to be very aware of it.
You're completely
Before
right.
this patient came in, I opened the door and said, this is patient, I have to hold my breath, breathe in and out, be patient, listen, don't screw up, if possible.
Okay,
You never know, right?
okay.